Welcome back to HSC AMA. I'm your host, Julian Imchinsky, and today I couldn't be more excited to have our guest, Mark Stouse. Mark is a chairman and CEO of ProofAnalytics, and I'm going to bring him to the panelists in a minute. And in the meanwhile, a little context about ProofAnalytics. Proof is an AI native platform that helps GTM teams plan, predict, prove, and pivot their investments in real time. We are experiencing a little bit of a technical difficulties. Just a second. More context on Mark. Mark has over 26 years of experience in marketing communications and strategy. He's passionate about transforming GTM performance with data-driven insights and agile decision-making. Trying to bring Mark onto the panel. We've got 40 questions about marketing mix modeling and all things GTM analytics. Should be an exciting event. Here's Mark. Hey, Mark.
Nothing quite like the age of AI, right?
Nothing like quite it. Happy New Year,
You too.
2024.
All right, let me turn on my video. Boy, it was like they went through an entire reset of the system over the holiday. All right.
So this one is going to be a spontaneous. Nothing
Cool.
you're used to, a new one. We have something around 50 questions, and they're coming.
Okay.
All submitted by our community. So I'm just going to blitz it.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
All right,
Question number one. What's the future of marketing mix modeling?
You know, I think that marketing mix modeling has already been evolving for a long time. It started out as an advertising-centric media mix modeling approach. It kind of, grew to encompass all the different parts of marketing. Today, it's really, and I think this is where it's going, it's go-to-market mix modeling. And that's not just leveraging GTM, that's acknowledging the fact that the overall scope of what is relevant to understanding efficacy and impact and efficiency, right, is enlarging. It just continues to get more complicated. So I think that MMM historically in B2C has been very efficiency oriented, optimization oriented. Whereas in B2B, it's much more about causality. It's much more about what's working and not working. And I think that will only continue forward.
Question from me, Mark. What is the biggest pain that ProofAnalytics helps solve? And what's it's been around for such a long time. And I'm just genuinely curious. You talk a lot about trust. You talk a lot about efficiency. You talk a lot about history. And I'm a huge fan of your content, your posts about history and CEOs and their misunderstanding of history. Curious, how is it all connected with Proof? And yeah.
I think that the best way to answer that question is to say that we typically, as human beings, we like to understand the world around us in terms of just a few factors that make the difference. And we prefer a very deterministic view of the world, right? If I do this, this will happen every time, no matter what, period, right? And the only time that we don't feel that way is when it doesn't work in our favor, right? The reality of life outside of the physical sciences, which is really where that bias started, right, is that everything is a probabilistic calculation. We are all living and working in a multivariable world where everything around us is constantly changing. We don't really understand this a lot, right? A lot of times you can't really see a lot of these factors. It's one of the reasons why we tend to think that things are more simple than they really are. We are kind of bookies in a sense, right? We need to have a better understanding of what the odds are, right? And maximizing the odds in our favor, particularly in something that is as programmatic as go-to-market, right? Or business for that matter, right? This is actually a back to the future moment as well, because none of this is new. I mean, Proof has operationalized it in a way that makes it a lot more accessible for people, a lot faster, a lot less friction, a lot more understandable, a lot easier to make a decision based on what you see there. But the fundamental math has been around for ages, right? Procter & Gamble was the first on the marketing side to really leverage it extensively in the early 1980s, and it's a cornerstone of B2C marketing today, this whole approach. So it's really, I would say we are a GPS, right, for helping you understand what's going to accelerate your journey, what's going to impede your journey, what do you need to do in response to still get to your destination. All of that kind of stuff. If we kind of think about life and work in general, most decisions are essentially navigation decisions. They are, hey, I'm here. I need to go over here. What's the best way to get there? Do I have enough resources to make the journey? Right? What are the things that are conspiring in my favor or against me, as the case may be? Right? So I would say that that's the answer, right? Is right now, most go-to-market and most business leaders don't know. They literally do not know, particularly in B2B. They have no idea of what's really working. And there's some really significant issues around this, right? Time lag, probably the biggest in terms of obscuring your understanding. And so you can't see B2B impact. You have to compute it. And that's Proof.
When is your book coming up?
Well, right now, if it stays on track, it's going to be on July the 4th. We're gonna Independence Day, so we're going to strive for that.
Exciting.
Yeah, no, it is. It's I'll tell you this, for anybody who is thinking about writing a book, it's just like a startup. Everything takes longer than you think. Really, it's really the truth.
I just have to be a robot, Mark. I have too many questions, so let's do this. Tactical. What is the best way to lower CAC?
Knowing what really works, right? This is the issue. I mean, everyone talks about, efficiency is the number one word of 2024. Sorry, bullshit. Okay. You can be driving your car very efficiently, and if you're going in the wrong direction, it's meaningless, right? So efficacy, effectiveness, impact, right? Knowing what those are, that's the number one thing. And efficiency and sustainability comes in after that. That's how you keep what works moving.
What's your advice for someone looking to move into sales management?
Understand that you're not really just looking at sales. You are looking at an entire go-to-market equation, and that you're a linear function. Sales is a linear function, meaning it creates value on a linear function. marketing exists to multiply that. It's a non-linear multiplier. And if you, as the sales leader, aren't getting every bit of leverage off of marketing that you can possibly get, you're totally screwing up.
Which forecasting tech actually works?
I'm sorry, give that to me again.
Which forecasting tech actually works?
I think that actually very little of it is real, because it's based, most of it is based on extrapolation, right? And when you're talking about extreme volatility out there in the marketplace, extrapolation doesn't work, right? This is why in 2023, so many companies were caught way out on their forecasts, right? They were not even remotely close, right? And so I would have to say that if you're not using causal analytics of some form, right, to run your business case forecasts, you got a problem. This is actually one of the things that's so fascinating about the whole thing, is that until about 15 years ago, companies were creating business cases for major investments that included causal analytics, included a forecast rooted in causality, right? That was updatable on a regular basis. So again, right, not a new concept, right? We're kind of having to rediscover it. We tend to do that a lot as human beings.
Just love asking those simplistic questions, Mark. Just this rare occasion. Let's ask
What?
Mark, who are your mentors? Just
My mentors.
yeah.
Man, you know what? I actually, I'm very blessed. I have many of them. There's a Jesuit, or now retired Jesuit priest, who's been a mentor of mine in a secular sense, right? For 30 years. I do a lot of reverse mentoring, right? Meaning where I'm mentored by people who are younger than me, that have less experience than me in some ways, but have way more experience than me in other ways. So I love to learn. So I tend to pester my mentors, right? Being a mentor to me is not an easy task, right? Because I'm always showing up with questions, wanting input, like we have proof advisors, which are sort of like mentors, right? And one of them made a joke this a couple of years ago in a meeting that he's worked harder as a proof advisor than he ever did, in his job, you know. And I said, can you talk more about that? Because I said, it's not like, we assign projects or something like that to our advisors. And he goes, yeah, but you got you. He started by saying you guys, and then he refined it, right? He said, I mean you, Mark, right? You're always on the phone with me, asking questions, right? And so I had to kind of learn to calibrate that a little bit. But I just love to learn. That's the sole motivation.
What inspired you to create the company?
We had such great success with using causal analytics on a large scale in big companies to really calibrate and prove the value of marketing and the larger go-to-market process. But it was extremely complicated. It was very expensive. We're talking about $7, $8, $9 million a year just in that, right? And you didn't have to be really like super smart to figure out that the number of companies on the face of the earth that were willing to spend that kind of money on that was kind of small, right? And so and yet we thought it was just completely indispensable, right? I mean, it was going to help so many people. So that's why we did it, right? And our goal from the very beginning, right, was, so this is like 6 years ago, was to price it, for example, at a point that literally anyone could afford it. The problem is that I mean, we raised some money, but we've been primarily a bootstrapped enterprise, right? And so you can't afford to dump your pricing, right? You can't afford to have that very, very approachable price point under those circumstances. But I mean, we're actually getting ready to finally do it, like in Q1, like pretty soon. We're going to do it. And because there's so many people who want to be able to grab it, use it on a usage-based model at a low cost, right? And it's time to do it. So we're going to do it. So there's never, that mission has always been a part of who we are.
Why isn't human behavior deterministic?
Human behavior isn't deterministic, right? In fact, it's anything but deterministic. And it's because it's constantly interacting with external factors that are changing, right? So you could describe human nature as consistently inconsistent, and you would be extremely spot on, right? If you just look at, this was the post that I made yesterday about CEOs and history and stuff like that, right? You can look at history as a series of events, time, date, place, names, whatever, right? And you can get a very deterministic view of it, right? But the human behavior part is not at all deterministic. And so this is why you have giant paradoxes that we all struggle to reconcile, all right? And so I would say this, the keeping it simple, right? If you're talking about physical laws, like the law of gravity, that's deterministic. You take 1,000,000 rocks up to the top of a building, you throw them all off the building, and there's not going to be a single one of them that is floating in the air when it's all over. They're all going to be on the ground. However, who falls in love with whom, right, is in no way deterministic. I mean, just look at all the couples that you're aware of in your own life where you're going, wow, that's such a great relationship, but I never have guessed that, right? I would have never put those two people together, right? That's a great example of it. So I would say that, that's the thing about, when you apply it into business, go to market, all that kind of stuff, which is all about human behavior. It's all about human behavior. It's a completely probabilistic calculation. You're never going to get to an absolute answer.
Mark, what are your thoughts on original thinking and GTM? And the reason I ask is just you don't have to spend hours analyzing, GTM of top companies or per category, like on G2. The GTM motions tend to be pretty much similar, and they tend to be similar because they are copied and there is no original thinking.
Right.
So I'm just curious, when I look at Proof, you do a lot of things really differently, starting with your content on LinkedIn. And curious your thoughts on this.
Well, I think that the reason why it's so incredibly uniform is that people are risk averse, right? And it is easier to be in with everybody else, even if maybe that's not really what's effective, than it is to go out on your own and say, I'm going to think differently. That is, you know, I like to think of myself as an original thinker, but I would never minimize the fact that it can be very scary, right? And the fact that I'm able to do it doesn't say anything particularly extraordinary about me, right? It's just a willingness to suck it up and go for it, and that's about it, right? I would say that but if we look at the inflection points in anything, it's always original thinking that drives it, right? Now, this is a numerator-denominator relationship, as it always is, right? Because what is original today is not going to be original tomorrow, because guess what? You did it, right? And so if everyone else starts following you, then it's not original anymore, right? But I mean, this is something that Leonardo da Vinci wrote about extensively, right? And he was not a fan of the status quo for all kinds of reasons. He thought the status quo was intellectually dishonest. That's a hell of a thought, right? He also thought that it was fundamentally ineffective. And he would make these arguments, right? And he would apply it to conduct war, agriculture, all this kind of stuff, right? To illustrate the point that if you do that which is totally expected, you're not going to get that much, right? So, I think so here's the hard part, drawing this back to the analytics for a second. When you do something original, the time lag to the point where it starts to cut for you is long, and there's no baseline against which you can assess it, right? And so, like with proof, I mean, just show you market timing is so critical, and it's the one piece that you really can't control, right? I would say the first 3 or 4 years, first 3 years, was, we felt like we were just shouting into space, into a void, Now, were we? No, a lot of people were listening, but they weren't yet motivated to respond in any volume, anyway. And then all of a sudden, it felt like this was kind of like 1 year into COVID. It suddenly felt like everyone woke up, turned around, and wanted to talk to us. And I've seen that kind of thing happen, like with clients, like when I was on the agency side, you'd see stuff like this, right? But it was like the first time that it ever happened to me, like personally, right? Because I mean, it's kind of like I felt like I went from being somebody that had an infrequent date to somebody who everyone wanted to date, right? And you couldn't, and you're kind of sitting there going, I haven't changed. I'm still the same person. What happened, right? So, I mean, it's a strange thing.
Back to the questions. How do you decide which vendors to keep or cut?
I think that is where the analytics really come into play in a big way. We have customers, for example, that run as part of the overall modeling process, right? They're looking at relative contribution from different agencies towards a particular goal, or different teams towards a particular goal. And if they're not seeing, over a relatively extended period of time, right? If they're not seeing the kinds of contribution that they need to see, they'll rethink the allocations. We actually have one customer right now. This is not a go-to-market situation at all, right? They have been running a roughly 2,000 employee pilot using Proof to assess the contributions of teams and roles towards particular outcomes. So each one of these 2,000 people has between 5 and 10 KPIs that are tracked regularly. And what they're trying to really understand, it's not really a Darwinian exercise at all. They're trying to understand like where there's like one big takeaway has been there's been a few roles in this company that have been the so-called golden roles, right? Where if you're in this role, you were going to get promoted and your career was off to the races, right? Inside that company. They have realized in the analytics that was largely because there was a really fast feedback loop, right? So you had a really strong sense of momentum and achievement and things like this, where they had other roles that were just as important, maybe even more important, but the time lag was far more of a factor. And so there would be, weeks and months where it looked like nothing was going on. And so it kind of created a prejudice against those roles. And they've kind of they're rethinking this. They're rethinking about how teams actually work together and collaborate, and whether or not, through no one's bad intention, right, are they actually working at cross purposes with each other, right? Creating friction where friction doesn't need to exist. I mean, it's all things like that. I mean, this is really an issue of change and transformation and staying calibrated. And again, it's like going on a trip, right? You're cruising down the road. It's a good route to your destination. Something happens out there that all of a sudden makes it not a good route anymore. You're going to have to turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left if you're going to get to your destination. It's the same thing in work and organizations.
Mark, I want to be respectful of your time. Do we have 10 extra minutes, 15 extra minutes?
Sure, yeah, keep going.
Awesome. Next question. Why do so many leaders misunderstand how to optimize go-to-market?
Because they're thinking about it from a cost basis first, not a efficacy and impact or effectiveness first, right? And they're also thinking, particularly if you're like a marketer, right, or a salesperson, sales leader, you're thinking about this as more is always better. So you are not really thinking about it in terms of the law of diminishing returns. So one of the things you see in Proof is an S curve, an optimization curve, right? And what it'll show you is that, hey, you've gotten a lot of value out of this particular investment, and you're now pretty much at that point of diminishing returns. So unless something really changes in the marketplace that resets your position on the curve, you would be kind of stupid to continue spending more and more and more money in that channel or in that thing, right? Because your marginal returns are falling. And I think that is, that's a really, really big part about it. But I think that the cost issue, the fact that CFOs I mean, most CFOs are still cost side CFOs as opposed to growth CFOs. And there's a balance that has to be struck at all the time in this, right? But when you're looking at it from a purely cost containment perspective, you're always going to over rotate. You're also, if you're not accounting for time lag effects. I mean, like, for example, during COVID, we had a large customer who was constantly modeling and changing stuff around based on the way the models were showing up. And they were approached somewhere in late 2020 by their finance team, and finance team was proposing a 40% cut in people and programs for marketing. They were then able to model what that 40% cut would look like for this company over several different time scales, right? Time horizons. And finance looked at that and said, wow, that's like too expensive, right? So they cut them 15 points and said, we're going to go somewhere else for the rest of it. I mean, I don't care how you feel about that, right? There's a lot of people that say, oh, 15-point loss is still 50. It's a win. That is a triumph deluxe. Okay. So, yeah, I think that most people, most businesses look at it also as it's a choice between I have to make my cost containment target now. And in the case of marketing, for example, there's no proof that I'm going to lose anything at all in the future, having done this. So you weigh a certainty against a maybe, and you go with the certainty, right? Proof has, capital P proof, has been a great leveler, I think, in organizations on that issue, because we can show them, we can model that it's going to actually be really expensive for them to do whatever they're proposing to do.
Mark, I'm curious, where did your interest for marketing started? And the reason I ask is that you constantly, like, you're a walking encyclopedia, and I mean, marketing is considered to be a pretty shallow discipline.
Yeah.
So what makes it interesting for you?
I'm just going to be totally radically transparent. It may get me into trouble, but so I've the part of me that you refer to, right, has always been there, but in school, it wasn't really cool.
Mhm.
So I decided that I wanted to be cool. So I ditched things like math and things like that. And I would actually put down answers I knew were wrong because I wanted, and I could sort of manipulate my grade. I could get the grade that was socially acceptable and yet wasn't too bad, right? And I went into marketing, communications, and then marketing, and before that, politics, right? Largely because I didn't have to work very hard to do it well, right? And I could be oh so social and have a great time and all that kind of stuff, right? And then what happened to me was I started running, this would have been kind of like in the late 1990s. I started running into situations where I was on the agency side, my clients weren't taking me seriously and weren't taking the agency seriously. They weren't taking the function seriously, right? And that triggered an ego response. And then it kind of started getting worse, right? Like when I was at HP in the early 2000s, working with Mark Hurd a lot. Hurd was just ruthless, and he would like get in your face. He would totally invade your personal space, right? And And I got to a point where I just said, I got to either do something about this, I got to fix this, or I've got to go do something completely different because this just sucks. There's just nothing redeeming about this at all. And can't really explain it, but about a week after I had that thought, he called me into his office and gave me a project to find a mathematically defensible way to solve the problem. So I went home. I pulled out my high school and college math books, and I read them with an enthusiasm that I had never read them before. Right, and I rediscovered regression, multivariable regression, for example, and things like that, right? And so I can't really say that as of 2005 that I intentionally went on a journey. It really is true that the journey begins with a single step, and you kind of find yourself just kind of continuing to move forward, right? And all of a sudden you're at this other place, right? That's kind of the way it kind of feels sometimes. And that's the way it was for me, right? And so today, I would say that the benefits for me have been analytical thinking has pulled together all the different streams of knowledge and thinking that I am into, right? And has made it a whole, or it is in the process of making it into a rationalized whole. It's kind of like what occasionally I'll write this, right? That if you are a historian long enough, you become a futurist. And if you're a scientist or a mathematician long enough, you become a philosopher, right? Both of those things are true. I totally relate to both of those ideas, right? And so if I had to just post on one thing, so let's just say marketing, I don't think that would work for me. I think that one of the things that I like about being a CEO, for example, is that it's very horizontal. And I think very T-shaped. And I think that is, the more T-shaped all of us are, the more fulfilling our life is, the bigger our contribution is, the more success we have, right? And we tend to stay in our specialization, and we don't layer in this horizontal part, which is what makes the specialization rich, right? It gives it context. Probably way more than you wanted. Sorry.
It's beautiful. What's the role of trust in getting deals done?
I would say that trust and confidence, which are two very different things, are the thing in B2B, particularly today. People are more risk averse than they've ever been, and that's saying something. They quite honestly feel, fair or not, right, that vendors have misrepresented their products, their services on such a pervasive basis that they don't know who to trust anymore. It's sort of like an extension, really, of what we see in our societies at large. One of the big problems with so one of the things that's driving peer-to-peer kind of interaction in B2B is, hey, if you're in the same kind of position that I'm in, same kind of role that I'm in, right, and you've had these experiences with this particular product, then I can probably trust you more than I can trust anyone else. The problem with that is just like getting your political information from your next door neighbor. It's either pretty much bang on, or it's like totally distorted and out of whack, right? And so it's I would say trust is, so when we look at it analytically, I'm trying to think of a way to really illustrate this concisely. You look at it analytically, the relationship between different measures of trust and average deal velocity is off the charts. And the relationship, the primary business relationship that average deal velocity has, of course, is with cash flow from revenue. So in the current marketplace, if you've got a situation where your company needs cash flow improved significantly and you're in marketing, you're going to need to be doing things that are very much about communicating all the reasons why your company should be trusted. Okay. Confidence it's kissing cousin, but it's not the same thing. It's about competence as opposed to something far deeper, right? So confidence in that, what the value you promise me that you can create, you can actually do it, right? Great example of this is that we've all worked with people that were supremely competent that we did not trust at all. Okay, think about that. Okay. You've also, it's a little less common, but you also probably have experienced situations where you had a colleague who was just the greatest human being on the face of the earth, and you would trust them with almost anything. Okay. But they're incompetent at their role. Now, maybe they'd be great in another role, but the one that they're in, they're a disaster, right? So you have very low levels of confidence there. Confidence scores, highly related, very strong relationships that exist with deal size and profitability on the deal.
What are your top predictions for GTM for 2024?
Well, I can tell you this, after the last year of interviewing almost 500 Fortune 1000 CEOs and CFOs, the overwhelming conclusion out of that experience is that if the go-to-market functions don't get their act together and really start calibrating and forecasting and recalibrating and showing that they can deliver value and control within reason the levels of value that they deliver, that they are aware of the externalities and that they can compute a lot of this, again, probabilistically. We've only seen the beginning of the pain. And there's a lot of other functions actually that are going through the same thing right now, and who have gone through it historically. Enterprise IT is a famous example, 20 years ago. So I think that actually Sangram Vajra and I were going back and forth on LinkedIn yesterday or the day before on this, and I think that it really is coming down to that, because the level of frustration in the C-suite, again, I'm not saying that I agree with everything that they've said, okay, but it's off the charts. It's a good thing that I can't quote these people by name for the most part, because like CEO of large company X with 1,200 marketers who describe them all as a bunch of effing, okay. I mean, it's just off the, who wants to inflict that on 1,200 marketers, right? And yet it is true, right? That's where they're coming from. It's not unique to marketing. They also have probably one of the most powerful quotes, since we're talking about go to market. was I was talking with this one CEO about awareness, confidence, and trust, which are kind of the pillars of brand and the pillars of decision making and things like that. And then we moved on. We were talking about this whole issue of different functions and go to market and how he felt about them. And he's like, I'm going to use awareness, confidence, and trust as the way I'm going to answer this. He's like, he goes, my CMO, I have total trust in. We're not going to have any beer company scandals in this company. They really take care of the brand. They really, it's a high trust organization. But I have no confidence at all in their ability to understand why they do what they do and how it impacts the business financially. I said, okay, so what about sales? He goes, it's the reverse. He goes, I have total confidence that my CRO, this is a very large company, by the way, which makes this a very scary statement. He's like, I have total confidence that the CRO will make his number. I have no trust in how he will make his number. And I'm kind of like sitting there going, damn, right? And I said, so tell me more. And he goes, well, most of our deals are multi-year deals. And he said, these contracts are like phone books. So he said, there's all kinds of ways to defer certain costs, certain obligations deep into the contract, which are ways to unburden the client, right? And maximize the commissions that are being paid now. And I'm sitting there kind of going, that's a huge problem. In many respects, it dwarfs the marketing problem, right? But I think that people are gonna have to get really, really real. It's not going to all happen in 2024. The whole premise of the book that I'm writing is we're in a 3-year revolution. And I'm using the word historically, right? I don't mean it. I'm not using the word conversationally. I mean, it's going to not be fun. There's going to be one or more Robespierres roaming the halls, right? There's going to be a guillotine. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's done in the next 3 years are going to have to be walked back, right? Later and apologized for. It's gonna be really, really not super great if everything continues to move in the way that it's moving right now. So, yeah, I would say that we're going to find out 3 years from now, we will see a completely new strata of CMO or whatever you want to call them at that time in place. There will be very few survivors from the current class. This is exactly what happened with CIOs 20 years ago. And with CHROs probably 10 years ago. So it's just it's very common. It's not abnormal. I think the only thing that makes it extraordinary in the case of marketing in particular, but also overall go-to-market functions, is that there's a level of frustration and antipathy here that has been building for a very, very, very long time, that it's all kind of coming due all at the same time under a period of profound pressure. One of the things I talk about this all the time, right? The cost of cash. cost and availability of cash. I mean, looking back on it, I think one of the reasons why in the first 3 years of Proof, we didn't have a whole lot of people responding was that money was so cheap and available. Who cares about optimizing it? Right? If we're wrong, whatever that means, right? We just get more money. Today, that's not the case.
You see it as a 3-year kind of long trend, or are we basically going to come back to the scenario, to the not so optimistic high investment scenario that we were in back in the 2020? And
I think that the costs of mounting a business are only going to go up, not down. And I realize that everybody is thinking, well, AI is going to take a huge amount of cost out, right? I don't think that that is necessarily true. I think it is situationally true. But so let's just say this. If the current prognostication of 300 million jobs removed from the economy due to AI over the next, say, 2 to 3 years, if that's accurate, who's buying anything? Like, you're not just liquidating the cost in your company, you're liquidating your customer too. Or at a minimum, your customer's customer, and it all ultimately the same anyway. It ripples, right? Up and down through the chain. So I'm not so sure that that's really the way it's going to operate. I think that, again, you have a bunch of corporate leaders who are typically very cost-centric, EPS-centric. They're let's call it commissionable goals, okay, are very oriented toward in that direction, okay, because it's something they can control. They can't really control revenue, but they can control cost, okay? So if they take out all this cost and the EPS goes way up and they make a lot of money personally, and by the time the consequences of all that ripple all the way down through the system, they are probably doing something else.
last thing I'm going to say, Gartner just released the biggest prediction, Mark. Cost of bots are coming. People are writing books. So I'm going to have AI customers, AI sellers, AI everything.
Yeah.
With an AI analytics.
Yeah, I think that all of that is actually based on this belief around the fact that you can be made to be deterministic, right? It can't. It won't. It's just not reality. That is science fiction. And I would say that if businesses were not under such pressure right now, people would be thinking about this a little differently. But I will say this, a great truth in history is that if you want to understand the power of a technology, look at how fast it was weaponized. As an investor, I've already been exposed to 3 or 4 LLM-driven buying bots, right? That essentially go out, so like the buying team inside of Corporation X, right? goes in, it plugs in all of its key wants and desires and requirements and all this kind of stuff. And then the bot goes out and, sweeps the internet and comes back with a series of recommendations. So sort of like SEO in that sense, okay? But here's where it gets really, really interesting. So in the same way that SEO, a lot of SEO material is written not to ever be seen by human eyeballs, but just by algorithms. You're already seeing companies who are weaponizing the LLM against these bots or to serve these bots, really. And they are publishing invisible material about their competitors that aren't true. These things are not true, right? So they're actively depositioning their competitors illegitimately and in ways that are very tough to find, right? Knowing that these bots won't have any problem finding this material at all, and that it will influence what the bot recommends. I would say that that's a problem, right? And there was an article today in the New York Times about the fact that this is already happening politically as well, right? So when you can no longer have an objective understanding, a reasonably objective understanding, a factual understanding of what is reality about anything, the first thing that the first victim of that is trust and confidence, right? And so I think actually we're at a far more existential place in some respects, not in all respects, but in some respects than we realize. So, I mean, I will say this. The other thing you really learn in history with technology is that the bad stuff that's done with tech can only be countered with other forms of that same tech. It's sort of like it takes one to know one, right? And so I think that you are, whether it's analytics or whether it's other AI-driven tools, right, that do completely other things, right? It's going to take AI to fight AI, right? In that sense, and that was true. I mean, there's a point in the transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age where a bronze sword went up against an iron sword and lost, right? So it's the same thing here.
It's a quote. Thank you so much for being part of this event. And thank you so much for watching. Mark, just leave us with an ultimate prediction.
In the end, the most important thing ever is who you are. It's humanity, right? The rest of it is a seduction that ultimately will leave you in a place that you never intended to be, right? And so that would be my, not really a forecast or a prediction as much as an encouragement, right? And just remember that instantaneous gratification is extremely expensive.
Beautiful. Please follow Mark Stouse and ProofAnalytics. And yeah, see you soon.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Julie.
Pleasure. Thanks.